All right, so now on to learning objectives. I can only say what I intend to do through this presentation. What you ultimately come away with is dependent on how much you engage with the case studies that we're going to do, the connections that you make based on the group interactions that we're able to foster, and also the insights that you can generate based on the Q&A that we're going to have at the end of the session. However, what I intend for you to take away from this session is learning how to reframe opportunities to ensure that based on the information that you have, you can maximize the impact and value of your work, and that you're ultimately able to adapt project plans based on the input that you get to maximize their input and value. So what is a perspective? There's a great story that goes along with this quote that the eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. This quote is from Henry Bergson, and the quote really outlines what happened in the story of a captain, a ship captain, and a lighthouse operator. And so what the story says is that this ship captain is operating a large ship, and it's very foggy outside, and he sees suddenly that there is this light that's coming up from the distance. And so he radios the operator of this other vessel, or so he thinks, and he says, please turn 30 degrees in the opposite direction so you don't have an accident. And then the person says, I can't. And then so the captain gets increasingly infuriated, increasingly angry at this other individual, up until the point where the person actually says, I can't move, I'm a lighthouse. And then suddenly the captain realizes, oh my gosh, that person that I was trying to get to do something, they weren't even able to do it because of all these reasons I was completely unaware of. So perspective is all about a point of view, and you're only able to comprehend and understand based on the information that you're aware of. And so usually when we think about perspectives, there are lots of comics that highlight the ridiculous lack of information or different perspectives that people can have. And so this is an example of how a perspective can be a very biased mental view based on what you want to see. So the person who's on a boat has been alone for all this time, very excited to see land. Someone who's stranded on the island, so excited to see a boat. So very dependent on what they want to see. Then perspective here is based on what's most familiar and what's closest to them. So you've got an elephant, but no one actually sees the whole thing. They see a fan, so they see a big ear, and they see that it's a great fan. Or they see its tail, and they think it's a rope. They see the big, heavy legs of the elephant, and they say, oh, it must be a tree, and so on and so forth. And what this just aims to emphasize is that based on where you're located, sometimes mentally or physically, you're only going to be able to see certain things. And so what you're interpreting will be dictated by that. Sometimes it's based off of what is most obvious. So the way that you're looking at something. So the 6 versus the 9. And then sometimes it's based on what's most comfortable. So a lot of the time when we think about or we start to stereotype different roles in society, we're usually settled on a particular way of thinking about people in different positions. But this comic is not really that funny, really just serves to emphasize that someone who is perhaps homeless and is looking for money based on the perspectives of other people, actually he has this sign that says, you can cry on my shoulder for $1, right? So he actually doesn't see himself as the one who's at a loss. He sees everyone else as being at a loss because perhaps there's something cogs in the general framework of the economy, and that's just something that he doesn't believe in. So again, different ways of looking at things based on your information and your experiences. So the conclusion is that you're always going to be doing you. Okay, so you do you because you have the information, you have the experience, and you're always going to be locked into your own way of thinking. But to think beyond that, to think beyond what you're usually thinking, you're going to have to do some hard work to intentionally think and seek out other perspectives. So how do you do that? How do you kind of change your glasses and take on these other ways of thinking? So I'm going to introduce you to a 3-stage framework, BAM for short, just so it's much more memorable for you. And BAM stands for looking at benefits, So try to brainstorm benefits that are required or nice to have for your project. So based on what you're trying to do, are you trying to get a research publication? Are you going to try to create a better student experience? Do you want to get improved scores on student assessments that you get? Are you trying to improve patient outcomes? Lots of different things that may be possible simply because you're all coming from very different areas. A is for attributes. So all of those different benefits are actually aligned with different people who you may be considering as part of that picture. So you're going to try to attribute those benefits to specific people. So different perspectives will mean that people care about different things more or less. And the goal of this exercise of using the BAM framework is to find people who care about things that perhaps you didn't think of, but would be useful to weave into the general framework of how you're executing and planning on your project. And by so doing, you can actually revitalize the way that you're approaching your work. Then M stands for modify. So modify, again, based on the information that you get from the benefits brainstorm, based on which kind of people are actually caring about the benefits that you're brainstorming, based on the new benefits that you're able to think of, to hear about based on your interactions with these people. You modify the plan to adapt to the needs, and they may be established, they may be emergent, but basically you're modifying to improve how much your project, your work aligns with what you initially intended versus what other people are now expressing that they would actually find very useful for your project to also do. So the goal from using the BAM framework is really to increase the impact and the success of the work that you're doing. So I wanted to demonstrate how the BAM framework could actually be applied through a case study. Now, this is an example that I really like to use a lot because it emphasizes the importance of human-centered design. And essentially what the BAM framework is trying to do is get you to reach outside of your own perspective and focus on the other humans that are involved. So CloudDX, if you're not familiar with this company, is actually a startup. So it's a startup that was started up by Dr. Swami Kohli, who is a clinician in Oakville. For those who are not from Hamilton, Oakville is about maybe 30 to 45 minutes away from Hamilton, depending on traffic. And what he did was he created this concept behind a device that was able to monitor several different vital signs from a person, and it was able to do that remotely, and then take those different vital signs, those metrics, and be able to say if someone was at risk of developing a certain set of conditions. So they called their solution Vitality, and ultimately it was in response to a competition that was being put together, and they placed third. So they did very, very well. But how did this solution actually come to life? Dr. Kohli actually went to Haiti after the big earthquake that they had several years ago. And he saw that there was a lot of smartphones. So in some countries, there are more smartphones than there are TVs, for example. So in a lot of countries, in South America, for example, in the Caribbean, a lot of people have one or two mobile devices each. And he said, there are so many smartphones, there are all these mobile devices, but ultimately there's still a lack of necessary clinical information about people. And then he kind of started to reflect, and he said, okay, so that's a problem in Haiti, but we're not really better off in the US. In the US, there are remote patient monitoring systems, but ultimately everything costs over $1,000 just for a set of all these different tests and different tools that you need to have all together to be able to monitor all these vital signs. And it's clunky. Even as a clinician, you come in, you have to do this, then that, then something else. And so it takes a long time, very inconvenient. And ultimately, he was thinking that there must be a better way to make this a seamless experience. And so what he did was he developed a bit of a hypothesis of what people would want. So that was his problem statement, what he really wanted to tackle as what could have very well been considered a research project at the time. And he expanded the scope of what he was able to do because he considered the benefits. So he took numerous perspectives and he thought, what kind of benefits would people want beyond him as a clinician just wanting everything all together? He conceived that people would want something for a low cost. They would want something that was portable, something that they could use at their home. And he figured that other clinicians more than likely would actually benefit from having something like this accessible so that they could remotely monitor their patients and ensure better health outcomes. So basically going from something like this to something like this. So going from very archaic, old computers, programs, compiling information together to a sleek mobile device interface and application that really could be much, much more user-friendly. Then after he did this analysis of benefits, he ultimately started to do some research to understand the benefits and attribute those benefits to specific types of people. So to the patients, to the clinicians, to others who could potentially help with the development here. And so as he did this research, he began to really start to talk to people. And the way that you talk to people sometimes is not directly, but in masses. And the way he talked to people and started to understand whether the benefits were real for them, he actually just created a Kickstarter or something along those lines, where he had the opportunity for people to prepay to put themselves on a waiting list, essentially, to receive this solution once it was done development. And the demand was so great that they had to stop the lists and stop people being able to put themselves on there because they simply weren't able to keep up with the demand. And that demonstrated that the benefit was really attributable to the patients that he was looking to develop this for. And as you see here, as he looked at the benefits, he began to understand who those benefits really belonged to. He was able to modify a plan of action in order to take this project and really make it into something that was impactful. So in innovation, in entrepreneurship, a lot of the time when you talk about medical device development or application development of any sort, you're talking about prototyping. You're talking about creating something from the simplest materials possible, putting it out there, and then creating something in response to the feedback that you get from those people that you're putting it in front of. And so this is a perfect example of how from BAM, you're taking the information, you're modifying a plan of action, and you're actually using that feedback to modify what you need to do to increase the impact of your work. So in this particular project, because it is something where the need isn't exactly precisely understood, this is a co-development approach that is really agile. And so for projects like this, you may see that this modification of plans is much more chaotic than it would usually be in a research or a clinical project that you would be familiar with. However, we'll talk through examples like that later on through the case studies that you're actually going to be working with in your small groups. However, in this case, they were prototyping, they were iterating based on feedback. So you see how they were really modifying their plan for even how something looked, the kind of sensors it had, what kind of material, what kind of color. Everything was kind of up in the air, and they had to take in more and more information over time to actually get to what the final product is today, which is this sleek device on at the bottom right here. And the last part of this is, of course, going to be testing. So they did clinical trials at Hamilton General Hospital, and they were ultimately able to get FDA approval. And they're currently getting embedded in a lot of different healthcare institutions to make the most of the Cloud DX product. Okay, so that's an example of co-development. But I think that sometimes when we look at a project like Cloud DX, we get very confused because we say, oh, but the work that I do, it's not going to, become something that is ultimately on the market. It's not going to be commercialized. It's not something that's going to be implemented in all these different hospitals. Sarah, I just want to think of more creative ways to do my project. And I get it. So when I talk about co-development, when I think about what Sonny Coley did when he initiated Cloud DX, that was a much more involved process where he was interfacing with everyone all along the span, from idea conception through to going to market. But when we talk about co-development, we can actually think about collaboration in many different ways to yield value. And the way that I like to think about collaboration is that we can do it together to co-define a problem. So we can actually use interactions with different people to better understand a problem that we're trying to get more information about. Perhaps it's a research project or a course improvement initiative, and we're not entirely sure if this is even a good idea. You can interact with your users or people directly, see if this is even something worth pursuing. So you can build support, and you can also potentially identify new potential challenges to tackle based on those conversations to co-define what the problem actually is. Collaboration can also mean co-designing what the solution looks like. So this is where you already know that the problem exists, but now you're going to take a step to interacting with all sorts of people to see, okay, if this was your problem, and I'm thinking maybe a new kind of questionnaire can be used to better assess patients for this condition. What kind of factors would you include in this questionnaire? So you're co-designing and you're asking for feedback and information that would be useful in defining the attributes that would actually need to be true about your solution to make it work. So again, different reason for collaboration, but still very, very useful. And the last one that I wanted to mention is that you can actually use collaboration to co-activate opportunities. So usually what this means is that you're using that partnership, that greater amount of feedback to actually gain access to something after you've developed the solution itself. So this could be if you want to actually ramp up awareness about what you've done. Maybe you've developed a workshop and you want to spread it across medical schools all across the country. That's a kind of partnership where you'd be reaching out to help gain access to new faculty members that this could ultimately impact. You could try to establish a partnership after you've developed a medical device and you need to have a partner to manufacture and distribute what you've created. And sometimes you can even benefit from partnerships to gain financial support. So let's say you don't have enough funding to be able to truly pursue a research project or a clinical project. That would be an opportunity to co-activate and collaborate in that kind of way.